The moment I stepped inside that house, everything felt too bright, too polished, too curated for people who pretended to care about family. The chandeliers glowed like stage lights, the marble floors reflected every movement, and the long dining table stretched so far it could have passed for a runway. That house was meant to impress strangers, not welcome kin. And on that Sunday evening, I understood something I had ignored for too long. I was the stranger. Alicia spotted me first. My daughter, 42 years old, impeccably styled, draped in a cream silk dress that looked like it cost more than my monthly retirement check. She didn't greet me. She didn't rise. She didn't smile. She only offered a small flicker of acknowledgement, the kind of nod you give a waiter who refills your water but isn't worth looking at twice. "Dad, you made it," she said, already bored. Across from her sat her husband, Damian Walker, the self-declared real estate king of Phoenix. Damian loved two things more than life itself: attention and the sound of his own voice. Tonight, he was indulging in both, draped back in a suit far too tight across his chest, the buttons straining from ego more than muscle. He didn't look up when I approached my seat at the far end of the table. He only flicked his wrist impatiently, as if my presence were a smudge he meant to wipe off. "Baby, tell them about the resort again," Alicia said, pouring herself more wine. Damian grinned, tapping a few pictures on his phone before holding it up to the couple nearest him. They leaned in, like disciples awaiting gospel. "This," he declared, gesturing dramatically, "is the future of luxury. The Sun Mesa retreat, wall-to-wall glass villas, private dune pools, a sky bridge observation deck. I'm telling you, once this 9-figure deal closes, Phoenix will never see anything like it." I sat quietly, unfolding my napkin, trying not to be noticed. I almost succeeded. "Dad," a voice called. Jordan, my grandson, 16. Bright, thoughtful, the only person in that room who seemed to notice the temperature drop when his mother and stepfather spoke to me. "Grandpa, my regional playoff is next Friday," he said, smiling. "You want to come? We're playing Canyon Ridge." I felt warmth rise in my chest. Before I could answer, Damian cut in sharply. "Jordan, don't bother your grandfather with that." Still no eye contact. "He needs his rest. He's old. Let him relax." Alicia giggled, sipping her wine. "Damian's right. Dad probably got tired just walking from the casita." I swallowed the sting. I wasn't fragile. I wasn't confused. I wasn't fading. But they decided I was, and their version of me became the only truth allowed in that house. Conversations resumed, flowing around me like water around a stone. Contractors, Italian marble, guest lists, liquidity. I stared at my plate, at a single cold piece of asparagus left untouched. My life had shrunk to that lonely vegetable, ignored and cooling, invisible. Until that night, I mistook silence for peace, patience for wisdom. But sitting at that table, drowning in the sound of my own erasure, I understood the truth. I wasn't being patient. I was giving them permission, and it was time to revoke it. 3 days passed before I saw Damian again. In those 72 hours, I managed to convince myself that maybe I had imagined the coldness at the dinner table. Maybe the wine had made Alicia sharper than usual. Maybe stress had tightened Damian's tongue. Fathers tell themselves comforting lies when the truth tastes like rust. But when the knock came, a hard, hurried, impatient rhythm, those lies died at my doorstep. I opened the door to find Damian standing there with a smile too wide to be real. In his hand was a bottle of Cabernet so expensive it came in its own velvet pouch. He shoved it toward me as if it were an entry ticket to the conversation he wanted to have. "Calvin, my man," he said, "brought you something special." "You know I can't drink," I reminded him gently. "Doctor's orders." He waved that off. "It's the gesture that counts." But gestures don't sweat. And Damian was sweating, beads forming at his temple, jaw tight, foot tapping like a man counting down seconds he didn't have. He stepped into the casita without waiting for permission. "So," he said, sliding onto my sofa as if he owned it, "I'm sitting on the opportunity of a lifetime, Cal. The Sun Mesa retreat? It's about to go nuclear. Richest investors in the Southwest lining up to get a piece." I stayed silent. He took that as encouragement. "There's just one tiny hiccup," he continued, rubbing his palms together. A regulatory delay. Totally routine. But the board wants to see liquidity on my end. Just temporarily. 6 months tops. Finally, he looked me in the eyes. I need you to take a small line of credit out on the casita. 600 grand. That's it. I'll pay you back 800. Easy money. 800,000 for a retired man on a fixed income. For a guest house I paid for myself. For a man who had just told my grandson that I was too old to walk across the lawn. No, I said softly. The smile vanished. Unbelievable, he snapped. After everything Alicia and I do for you, you live here for free. I bought this land, I corrected him. His eyes sharpened, the warmth draining until only venom remained. You'll regret this, he hissed. I swear, Calvin, you're going to regret being so damn selfish. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture of Marina, my late wife, shook on the wall. The sound settled into my chest like a warning, or a promise. The pain came just after 3 in the morning. A slow tightening beneath my breastbone, then a crushing grip spreading down my left arm. Not sudden enough to be a heart attack, but familiar enough to trigger the memory of my cardiologist's warning. Stress-induced angina, a flare of the body's way of saying, you have gone too long carrying too much. I sat up in bed, breathing shallowly, sweat collecting at my temples. The room spun once, then steadied. A heaviness settled in my chest like a fist refusing to unclench. I reached for my phone. The first number I dialed was Alicia's. It rang 4 times before she answered with a groggy, irritated exhale. Dad? What? It's the middle of the night. Alicia, I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I'm having chest pains. I don't think it's a heart attack, but I need to go to the clinic. Could you drive me? A long sigh. Not fear, not concern, inconvenience. Dad, seriously? I have the Marina Foundation brunch at 8. The whole committee is coming. I can't just get dressed and go driving across town. If it's that bad, call 911. Don't overreact. Before I could speak again, the line went dead. I stared at the dark screen, my breath shallow, my chest burning not from pain anymore but from something deeper, something old, something like grief. I called a rideshare. The driver, a soft-spoken college kid, kept glancing at me through the rear-view mirror as I held my chest. You okay, sir? Want me to go faster? His concern felt like a foreign language. I nodded, grateful and ashamed at the same time. At the emergency room, they moved efficiently. An EKG, blood pressure, nitroglycerin under the tongue. The doctor confirmed it. Stress-induced angina. Not life-threatening yet, but not a warning to ignore. Take it easy, he said, scribbling notes. Cut down on stress. I almost laughed. I was discharged a little after 9. Outside, the Arizona sun was already high, baking the concrete. I ordered another rideshare back home. As the car turned into the gated drive, I saw Alicia's pearl-white SUV, but it wasn't parked near the house. It sat outside a luxury spa across the street, exactly where her charity brunch was being held. She hadn't just dismissed me. She had gone back to sleep, gotten dressed, driven herself to a morning of mimosas and photo ops. The ache in my chest returned, this time not medical. It was the moment I realized I wasn't just a burden to them, I was disposable. The knock came the next morning. Not a polite tap, not the careless pounding Damien used when he wanted to feel dominant. This was a precise, professional rhythm, cold, impersonal, a warning wrapped in wood. When I opened the door, a man in a crisp delivery uniform stood with a digital tablet and a thick white envelope tucked under his arm. Calvin Mercer? He asked flatly. Yes. Legal Express Delivery. Sign here. I pressed my finger on the screen. He handed me the envelope without ceremony, turned on his heel, and walked away before I even stepped back inside. The envelope was heavy, not with paper, with intent. I carried it to the small kitchen table, the same one where Marina and I once shared midnight tea while watching the desert sky through our window. I sat down, reached for the old brass letter opener she'd given me on our 10th anniversary, and sliced through the seal. My eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. By the fourth, the silence in the room felt alive, breathing against the walls. The petitioners, Alicia Mercer Walker, Damian Walker. The respondent, Calvin Isaiah Mercer. They were petitioning the Superior Court of Arizona for an emergency conservatorship, declaring me mentally incompetent, unfit to manage my own finances, unsafe to make my own medical decisions, a danger to myself. The words might as well have been carved into my skin. My chest didn't hurt the way it had the night before, but something cold spread through me, sharp and precise, like ice shards traveling through my veins. I flipped to the medical evaluation exhibit A. A psychological assessment, signed by Dr. Neville Hart. 3 pages of lies. According to him, I exhibited signs of memory decay, disorientation, paranoia, emotional instability, an inability to comprehend financial information. He concluded I required immediate, full-time supervision. I stared at the signature. Neville Hart. I had never met the man in my life. A slow, bitter laugh escaped me, quiet and humorless. So this was their plan. Not a fight, an erasure, a legal burial, while I was still breathing. I stood up, envelope in hand, and walked across the manicured lawn toward the main house. The Phoenix sun burned overhead, but I felt nothing, only clarity. The sliding glass doors were open. Music played softly. Ice clinked in glasses. They lounged by the pool, as if they hadn't just attempted to crush the man who raised Alicia, the man who had paid for her college, who tucked her in at night when Marina worked late shifts. "Dad?" Alicia sat up, eyes narrowing at the envelope. What are you doing here?" Damien turned, sunglasses catching the light. His smile curled like a blade. "Well," he said, lifting his drink in a mock toast, "looks like you got our little memo. Explain this," I said quietly, holding out the petition. Alicia flinched at the sight of it, but Damien didn't. He stood, wiping water from his hands with a towel, and approached me with condescending confidence. "It's for your own good," he said. "We were going to talk to you about it before the hearing." "Hearing?" The word tasted metallic. "In 2 days," Damien replied. "Relax. It's routine. You need help, Cal. You're confused. You forget things. You don't understand money anymore." "I had indigestion," I said. "Not dementia." He waved me off. "See? That's exactly the kind of denial the doctor mentioned." Alicia finally spoke, voice trembling slightly. "Dad, we're only trying to protect you." If she had looked at me, truly looked, she would have seen the moment something old inside me cracked open. But she didn't. Damien stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You better get yourself a public defender. No point wasting real money on this. You don't have long until the court takes over everything." He smirked. Some people just shouldn't be in charge of their own lives. That was the last thing he said before I turned and walked away. Back to my casita. Back to the quiet. Back to the place where I had buried a part of myself. I closed the door behind me, the lock clicking into place like a trigger being pulled. Then I walked to the back closet, pushed aside old coats, and pressed my thumb against the biometric panel hidden in the wall. A soft green light blinked. A steel bolt slid open. The door swung inward, and I stepped into the room they never knew existed. My real home. My real life. The life I left behind. The life of the ledger. The room smelled faintly of cold metal and old paper, the scent of a past life waiting patiently to be reclaimed. 3 wide monitors rested on a steel desk. Filing cabinets lined the walls. A dedicated, encrypted phone system blinked steadily in the corner, still alive after all these years, like it had been holding its breath for me. The ledger had lived here once, and tonight he woke up. I sat in the chair, the one with the worn leather armrests, from long nights spent untangling fraud schemes and exposing corruption, and powered up the console. Lines of code flickered across the screens, reconnecting to systems I had not touched since the day I walked away from Washington. For a moment, the past sat on my shoulder like a familiar ghost. Then I picked up the secure phone. There was only one number I needed. 11 digits. I dialed them from memory. It rang once. "Dalton Investigations," a clipped voice answered. "Renee," I said. "It's Calvin Mercer." A long silence followed. Not confusion, recognition. "Mr. Mercer." Her voice softened, then sharpened again. "I thought you vanished after your retirement. People still talk about you." "The ledger. My father said you walked away for good." "I did," I replied. For my wife. For Alicia. For peace. And now? She asked. I looked at the stack of legal papers beside me. Now someone thinks they can bury me alive. I heard papers shuffle on her end. Tell me everything. I did. Every detail. The petition. The false diagnosis. Damien's smug arrogance. Alicia's trembling silence. The hearing in 2 days. When I finished, there was another silence, this time heavier. Send me the documents, Renee said. All of them. I scanned the packet into the encrypted line. She studied each page quickly, breathing growing colder as she flipped through the evidence. This psychologist, Dr. Neville Hart, she muttered. His credentials look wrong. And that signature? I've seen forgeries cleaner than this. Her chair creaked. Give me 3 hours. Renee, I said. I need it in 2. Then you'll have it in 1. Even through the encrypted connection, I could hear the familiar shift in her voice, the razor-edge focus her father once had whenever a case hinged on a single crack in the armor. Calvin, she added quietly, whoever did this to you made a mistake. They assumed you were alone. I was, I said. Not anymore. She hung up. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of my old systems filling the room like a heartbeat, returning after years of silence. They wanted a helpless old man. What they awakened instead was the one person they should never have provoked. The sun had barely risen when the encrypted line buzzed exactly 58 minutes after Renee hung up. She didn't waste time with greetings. Calvin, she said, voice sharp with a mix of triumph and disbelief. I found him, and you're going to want to sit down. I'm already sitting, I replied. Good, she said, because this is bad, very bad, for them. A soft rustle of paper traveled through the line. Your so-called psychological expert, she continued. Dr. Neville Hart is not a psychologist. He is not a psychiatrist. He is not a neurologist. He is not even a licensed counselor. I waited. He is, she said slowly, a veterinarian. A former veterinarian. My jaw tightened. Former? Yes. The Arizona Veterinary Board permanently revoked his license 4 years ago for narcotics theft, forging prescriptions, and running an illegal opioid distribution ring out of a strip mall clinic in Mesa. I closed my eyes briefly. A vet. A disgraced vet. Signing a mental competency evaluation used to try to steal my life. How did Damien find him? I asked. That, Renee replied, is what took me the other 40 minutes. I leaned forward as she continued. When Hart was arrested, he couldn't afford bail. Someone had to post bond for him. And that someone, a pause, was an LLC called Red Coyote Ventures. I recognized the pattern instantly. Shell company? I asked. Yes, she confirmed. Brand new at the time. Filed with minimal disclosures. And the listed manager? Damien Walker. A cold clarity sharpened in my chest. That means Damien didn't find Hart last week, I murmured. He's had him in his pocket for years. Exactly, Renee said. This wasn't a sudden act of desperation. This was a contingency plan. A weapon Damien kept hidden for whenever he needed a medical signature he could control. A long silence stretched between us, the kind that marks the moment when a case shifts from suspicion to certainty. I turned back to my monitors and began pulling up the financial maps I'd started sketching the night before. Walker Ridge Group, Suncrest Mesa Holdings, Ridgespan Development, LLC. The names sounded legitimate, but the patterns were wrong. Too many transfers. Too many identical transaction amounts. Too much movement for a stable business. Renee, I said quietly, I'm going deeper. I figured you would, she replied. But be careful. Men like Damien, men who prepare years in advance to sabotage their own family, they're dangerous and desperate. Desperate men make mistakes, I said. That's how they get caught. And what do you expect to find? She asked. I stared at the screen, where a cluster of red markers blinked like open wounds. A motive, I said. And once I find that, I added, voice steady, I'll know exactly where to cut. The ledger was awake, and the real hunt had begun. There are moments in life when the air changes, not from weather, not from temperature, but from truth. As I leaned toward my monitors, watching Damien's universe of companies flicker across the screen, I felt the exact moment the air in the room shifted. It was the same sensation I used to get in Washington when a case began to unravel, when the lies started confessing themselves. Walker Ridge Group lit up first, then Suncrest Mesa Holdings, then Ridgespan Development LLC. Dozens of transactions, hundreds, money going in circles, sometimes in figure eights, like a man desperately trying to hide that he was drowning. I opened one of my old tools, an internal DOJ pattern recognizer I helped design before I retired. I no longer had official access, but the back door I built into the trial version had never been patched. Within seconds, colored lines appeared across a glowing desert map of Arizona. Every red line was a problem. Damien had created a spiderweb, and every strand led toward one center, the Sun Mesa retreat. "Let's see what you're really building," I murmured. I began opening his documents one by one. Expense reports, construction contracts, invoices from contractors. I recognized some reputable, some infamous for cutting corners. The deeper I went, the clearer the picture became. The project wasn't just over budget. It was hemorrhaging. $48 million in excess spending, 16 active contractor liens, 2 lawsuits waiting for filings, a property tax delinquency notice. Then I found something worse. In a separate data vault protected behind a firewall, so amateurishly configured, it insulted me. I discovered threads linking Damien to a private equity lender, Pinnacle Crest Capital. Not a conventional bank, not a place people went for stable loans. Pinnacle Crest was famous for giving lifelines to people already sinking. They specialized in high-risk, high-interest capital injections, the kind people like Damien only sought when they'd exhausted every legal, respectable option. I clicked deeper. Damien had originally taken a $22 million loan, but with the delays, the luxury upgrades he promised investors, the mismanaged construction, and the internal bleeding of cash, penalties had stacked faster than he could hide them. The emails were damning. Subject: Notice of breach. Subject: Immediate attention required. Subject: Final warning. Subject: Capital call, issued effective immediately. I opened the last one. Pinnacle Crest was demanding a $6 million payment within 10 days. And that notice had been sent the day after Damien stormed into my casita, asking for $600,000. He didn't need a favor. He didn't need a bridge loan. He needed a miracle. And I had refused him. Suddenly, the conservatorship filing made sense. He didn't want my house. He didn't want my savings. He wanted everything. He needed control of my entire estate, not for wealth, but for survival. But something still didn't fit. "How did he pay for the lawsuit?" I whispered, tapping my fingers against the desk. "The lawyers he hired weren't cheap. The fraudulent doctor wouldn't have signed anything for free. And the paperwork alone would have cost tens of thousands. Where did a drowning man get that kind of cash?" That question led me to a place I hoped deeply, painfully, I would not need to search. The Marina Mercer Foundation, the charity I created in my wife's memory, the fund that once supported pediatric cancer research, the organization I placed Alicia in charge of because I believed it would connect her to the mother she lost. $3.2 million. That's what the foundation held last year. My hands felt suddenly heavier on the keyboard. I accessed the foundation's private financial portal. I still had founder permissions I never used. I typed my old credentials. The page loaded. My stomach dropped. The total remaining balance: $297,270. My throat tightened. I clicked open the last 12 months of transactions. That was when I stopped breathing. $120,000 to Walker Ridge Group, $85,000 to Ridgespan Development, $50,000 to Suncrest Mesa Holdings, countless transfers to consultants whose names traced back to P.O. boxes and shell entities connected to Damien. Every major payment bore one thing in common: the same swirling signature: Alicia, my daughter. The air in the room grew colder, sharper, pressing into my chest until I couldn't tell if the ache was emotional or physical. This wasn't just Damien's greed. This was Alicia's complicity. She wasn't being manipulated. She was participating. I stared at the digital signature of my daughter on a check that had funded the very lawsuit meant to declare me incompetent. My heart didn't just hurt, it broke. I sat back, letting the truth settle inside me like heavy sediment. Damien was drowning, but Alicia, she was already gone. And the saddest part was that neither of them realized the storm they had awakened. Because the man they thought was a fragile retiree, the man they tried to bury, was once the sharpest blade the government had ever unsheathed. And they were about to learn exactly what the ledger could do. For several minutes I sat in silence, surrounded by screens glowing with betrayal. Alicia's signature stared back at me. Damien's forged financials flashed like crime scene photos. The Marina Mercer Foundation, Marina's legacy, had been hollowed out to fuel a sinking empire. I felt a heaviness in my chest, not the tightness from before, not a medical warning. This was something deeper, a grief that didn't ache. It burned, but grief was useful. Pain sharpened a man, and I needed to be sharper than ever. I wiped a hand across my face, sat forward, and opened a locked digital folder titled simply Contacts. It held only 3 names. People I had vowed to never call again unless a life depended on it, mine or someone else's. One name glowed brightest: Samuel Rhodes, founder of Pinnacle Crest Capital, one of the most feared private lenders in the Southwest. A man whose empire had been built on ruthless efficiency and cold logic. And 30 years ago, he had almost gone to prison for a fraud he didn't commit. Almost, because I found the numbers that saved him. He owed me his freedom. I pressed call. The encrypted line dialed twice before a clipped male voice answered. "This is Rhodes." "Hello, Samuel," I said calmly. "It's been a long time." A pause, then a sharp inhale. "Mercer?" His voice changed instantly, losing its steel. "Lord, I thought you were gone. Off the grid. Dead in a cabin somewhere." "Retired," I corrected. "But I need a favor." "Anything," he said without hesitation. "Name it." I leaned back. "You hold a loan," I said, "to a man named Damien Walker for the Sun Mesa retreat." "Ah," he exhaled heavily. "That train wreck. My analysts are preparing to seize the property Monday morning." "I want to buy the debt," I said. "All of it." Silence. Not refusal calculation. "Calvin, that's toxic paper. The man is a financial corpse." "I'm not investing," I replied. "I'm taking control." A beat. "Understood." His voice hardened with conviction. "I'll have my legal team transfer ownership of the full note and collateral obligations to a blind trust. You'll be the beneficiary. Clean, private, untraceable." "How soon?" "2 hours," he said. "And Calvin, whatever this man did, I'm guessing it's bad." "It is," I answered. "And you're not doing this for profit?" "No." Another pause. Then God help him," Samuel whispered, "because no one survives when the ledger steps into the light." The line went dead. I stared at the screens, at Alicia's signature, at Damien's lies, at the millions funneled out of Marina's foundation. 2 hours. In 2 hours, Damien wouldn't just be a fraud. He would be my debtor, my responsibility, my target. He thought he was dragging an old man into court. He had no idea he'd just put his entire life into my hands. 2 days later, the morning of the hearing arrived, with a pale Arizona sky stretched thin across the horizon. I dressed slowly, deliberately, not in the soft cotton shirts Alicia preferred me to wear, not in the muted sweaters she thought befitting of an old man. I wore a charcoal suit from a better time, crisp, precise, a reminder of who I had been long before they tried to reduce me to a burden. When I stepped outside, the air was cool, rare mercy in Phoenix. I breathed it in, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the car where Renee waited. She stepped out as I approached, her expression unreadable, until her gaze shifted to my suit. "Good," she said quietly. "Let them see you." We drove in silence, the city rising around us in heat-shimmered towers and sun-glassed windows. Only when the courthouse appeared did she speak again. "Calvin," she murmured, staring at the building. "Whoever they think you are, that's not the man who's walking in today." I nodded once. They're about to learn. Inside, courtroom 4B was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a faint smell of stale coffee, the kind of room where families were dismantled with polite, legal language. Alicia and Damien were already there. Alicia sat stiffly, hands clasped in her lap, her pearl earrings trembling slightly every time she shifted. She stared straight ahead, refusing to look at me, or unable to. But Damien, he looked. He smirked the moment he saw me, then shook his head slowly, in mock pity. He leaned toward Alicia and whispered something. She giggled, nervous, forced. A sound I would remember for a long time. Renee and I took our seats. She placed a thin briefcase on the table, one that held far more ruin for Damien than he could ever imagine. "All rise," the bailiff called. Everyone stood. Judge Elliot Crane entered, robes neat, expression bored until he saw me. He froze. His eyes widened. His mouth parted. The gavel slipped slightly in his grasp. He stared longer than was appropriate, studying my face like a man staring at a ghost he thought had been buried decades ago. And I recognized him too. 30 years ago, he had been a nervous young assistant prosecutor in Washington, tasked with a white-collar case too complex for him to handle. He had been drowning, until the DOJ brought me in. Until the ledger turned chaos into clarity. Now here he was, wearing the black robe. "Please be seated," Judge Crane murmured, but his voice was different, tight, uneasy. The petitioner's lawyer, a slick man named Barton Quinn, rose with confidence. "Your Honor, we are here to address the urgent issue of Mr. Mercer's declining mental state." "Sit," the judge snapped. Quinn blinked. "Your Honor," I said. "Sit." Judge Crane adjusted his glasses, eyes pinned on me. "Before you speak, counselor, I need one clarification." He leaned forward. "Is the respondent in this matter the Calvin Mercer?" Quinn frowned. "He is Calvin Mercer, Your Honor, but I'm not sure what." Judge Crane cut him off. "No. I am asking if this is the same Calvin Mercer formerly employed by the federal government, the one they called the Ledger." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Alicia's head snapped toward me. Damien's smirk vanished. Quinn laughed nervously. "Your Honor, the man before you is a retired old." Judge Crane slammed his gavel. "This courtroom," he said coldly, "will show respect. If this man is the Ledger, then your petition carries a very steep burden of proof." Quinn swallowed hard and motioned to his first witness. The petitioners called Dr. Neville Hart. A door creaked. A thin, jittery man with thinning hair shuffled in. He wouldn't look at me, wouldn't look at the judge. Only at Quinn. "Dr. Hart," Quinn began, "did you evaluate Mr. Mercer?" I did," Hart said, "and he shows signs of severe cognitive dysfunction." Renee rose. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "before we proceed, the court should be aware that Mr. Hart is not a doctor of psychology, psychiatry, or neurology." Hart froze. Quinn frowned. "Objection." "Overruled," the judge said immediately. "Explain, Miss Dalton." Renee stepped toward the projector with unhurried precision. "Mr. Hart," she said, "is a former veterinarian. His license was permanently revoked for illegally distributing narcotics. He has no authority to diagnose mental competency." The courtroom went silent. Judge Crane's gaze turned lethal. "Mr. Hart, is this true?" Hart stammered, sweating. I mean, yes, but—" "Bailiff," the judge said, voice low and dangerous, "take this man into custody. He has committed fraud upon this court." The bailiff's hand snapped onto Hart's arm. Metal cuffs clinked. Alicia gasped. Damien's entire face flushed mottled red. Quinn tried to object again, but the judge raised one hand, stopping him cold. "This hearing," Judge Crane said, "has just taken a very serious turn." His eyes moved to me. "Mr. Mercer, you may proceed when ready." I nodded gently. Because this was the moment everything began to burn. The courtroom had shifted. You could feel it in the air, how silence thickened, how eyes sharpened, how every breath from the petitioner's table seemed to scrape the floor. When Judge Crane ordered Neville Hart into custody, something inside Damien snapped. His knee bounced. His jaw flexed. He leaned toward Alicia, whispering furiously. She didn't respond. Her eyes were glassy, shaken. She finally understood that the ground under them was cracking. "But Damien?" He doubled down. "Your Honor," Quinn said shakily, "my client, Mr. Walker, would like to testify on his own behalf." Judge Crane didn't even hide his disdain. Very well, but be advised, Mr. Walker, you are under oath. Perjury carries penalties you are clearly unfamiliar with. Damien strode to the witness stand with forced confidence, straightening his tie, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket, as if that would restore the dignity leaking out of him. When he sat, he crossed his legs, folded his hands, and leaned back, performing the role of a calm, concerned family man. Quinn began. Mr. Walker, why did you and your wife petition for conservatorship? Damien exhaled slowly, shaking his head with exaggerated sorrow. We did it out of love, he said. Out of fear. Mr. Mercer is confused, forgetful, paranoid. He hides in that little casita for days. He thinks people are out to get him. He simply isn't capable anymore. He turned toward me as he spoke, pity thick in his voice. He doesn't understand finances, not modern finances. I tried to help him. I offered him an incredible opportunity, a safe investment. He refused. That's when we knew he wasn't thinking clearly. He needed protection. Renee stood. Mr. Walker, she said calmly, you testified that you were trying to protect Mr. Mercer from himself, correct? Yes. And that he is not capable of understanding modern finance? Correct. She nodded once. So when you asked him for $600,000 2 weeks ago, were you testing his capacity? Damien blinked. I was giving him a chance to be part of the family business. And when he refused, you concluded he was mentally unfit. Yes, Damien said confidently. Only someone who doesn't understand money would turn that down. There it was. He had built his entire case on his hurt pride and my refusal to rescue him. Renee stepped closer. Mr. Walker, she said, flipping open her folder, is it true that your development project, the Sun Mesa Retreat, is currently $48 million over budget? Damien stiffened. That's exaggerated. Is it true, she continued, that you are facing 16 active contractor liens for non-payment? Damien's throat bobbed. That's normal in large projects. And is it true, Renee said louder, that Pinnacle Crest Capital issued a $6 million capital call 10 days ago due to your breach of loan covenants? Quinn shot up. Objection. Overruled, Judge Crane barked. Damien tried to laugh it off, but it came out strangled. It's a temporary setback. Every business has them. Renee didn't blink. Then how, she asked, did you afford to pay Mr. Quinn's retainer, and the fraudulent evaluation from Mr. Hart, and the legal fees for this petition? Damien's mouth opened, then closed. Renee delivered the blade. You stole it, she said, from the Marina Mercer Foundation. Alicia flinched as if struck. That's not true, Damien snapped. Renee projected the foundation records onto the court screen. $120,000 to Walker Ridge Group, $85,000 to Ridgespan Development, $50,000 to Suncrest Mesa Holdings. Multiple transfers to shell companies tied to Damien. And the authorizing signature, Renee said softly, tapping the screen, belongs to your wife. Alicia broke then. A choked sob escaped her as she rose from her seat, staring at the evidence with wide, betrayed eyes. You told me, she cried at Damien. You told me it was for the gala, for administrative fees. You said it was legal. Damien whipped toward her, panic flaring. Shut up, Alicia. She recoiled, trembling. Renee stepped back. Her work was done, but Damien wasn't. He exploded. I wouldn't have needed any of that if he'd just given me the money, he roared, pointing at me with a trembling hand. This is his fault. He could have fixed everything. He made me do it. The courtroom fell silent except for Damien's ragged breathing. He stared wildly around, as though expecting someone to agree. Nobody did. Judge Crane's face hardened like stone. Mr. Walker, he said, voice low, dangerous, final. You have just confessed under oath to fraud, coercion, and attempted exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He turned to me. Mr. Mercer, do you wish to respond? I rose slowly, the room holding its breath. Yes, Your Honor, I said, because we haven't even begun. I stood there, feeling every eye in that courtroom lock onto me, not as an old man, not as a fragile retiree, but as someone they finally recognized, someone they should never have pushed. I nodded to Renee. She reached into her slim briefcase and withdrew a blue-bound stack of documents. Thick, crisp, heavy, with consequence. But she didn't hand it to me. She walked it straight across the aisle and placed it gently on the table in front of Damien. He stared at it like it was a venomous animal. What is this?" he muttered. Renee didn't smile, didn't gloat. Her voice was calm and surgical. "Mr. Walker, this is a notice of foreclosure and seizure, effective immediately." Quinn lunged for the document, flipping it open. His face drained of color so fast it looked like he was bleeding out. "Your Honor," he stammered. This is from Pinnacle Crest Capital?" "No," Renee corrected, her voice slicing cleanly through the room. "That was yesterday." Damien snatched the document from his lawyer, scanning it with frantic eyes. "My God," he whispered. "No. This can't be right. This says the debt was reassigned to a blind trust," Renee said, "owned by a private beneficiary." Damien looked up at me, eyes wide with horror. "Calvin, tell me this isn't you." I stepped forward. "Damien," I said quietly, 3 days ago you defaulted on a $6 million capital call. Pinnacle Crest was preparing to seize everything you own." I paused, letting the truth drop like lead. "Before they could, I bought your debt." A gasp swept through the courtroom. "You what?" Damien choked. "You bought the loan? You bought me?" "No," I corrected gently. "I bought your consequences." Renee placed another sheet on the projector. The court screen lit up with the list of assets now seized under my control. The Walker home, the luxury cars, the Resort Development Corporation, every shell company tied to his name, even the personal accounts he thought were untraceable, every line item stamped with "Transferred to beneficiary C. Mercer." Damien shook his head violently, voice cracking. "You can't do this. You tricked me." Judge Crane leaned forward, eyebrows raised high. "Mr. Walker," he said, "in my courtroom, we call that accountability, not trickery." Alicia stared at the list on the screen, hands cupped over her mouth, her breaths short and shallow. She wasn't crying for Damien. She was crying because the life she helped him build, the life she sacrificed my wife's foundation for, was vanishing before her eyes. Judge Crane spoke again. "In light of the evidence presented, fraud, embezzlement, coercion, and a fraudulent conservatorship petition, I am dismissing this petition with prejudice." His gavel came down. "But we are not done," he added. "Mr. Walker, please remain where you are." 2 bailiffs stepped forward. "For charges of financial fraud, attempted exploitation, and conspiracy, you are hereby remanded into custody pending formal criminal proceedings." Damien surged to his feet. "No, you can't arrest me. I'm the victim. He's manipulating this. The bailiff seized him by the arms. His voice cracked into panicked screams as they dragged him away. "Calvin, you ruined me. You ruined everything." I didn't answer. He had done that himself. The judge turned to Alicia, who looked impossibly small in her designer blouse. "Mrs. Walker," he said, "you will be contacted by the district attorney's office. Your cooperation will determine your charges. I suggest you choose wisely." She nodded numbly, tears streaking her cheeks. As the bailiffs pushed Damien out the side door, the heavy silence left behind felt like a final verdict. The case was over. But the fallout had only begun. When the courtroom finally emptied, the fluorescent lights above hummed like distant insects, the last echo of a battle that had ended not with shouting but with truth. Renee gathered the documents with quiet efficiency, but her eyes stayed on me. "You did what had to be done," she said. "Maybe, but necessary things are rarely painless." I stepped out into the hallway. Alicia sat on a wooden bench, elbows on her knees, her face buried in shaking hands. The pearl earrings she'd worn, Marina's favorite, glinted weakly under the courthouse lights. For a moment, I hesitated. She was my daughter, my last tie to the woman I'd loved more than life. She sensed me before she saw me. Her shoulders tightened. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red, her voice hoarse. "Dad." It wasn't anger in her. It wasn't defiance. It was exhaustion, soaked in regret. I didn't sit beside her, but I stepped close enough that she had to lift her gaze to meet mine. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. All this time, why didn't you warn me who he really was? I clasped my hands behind my back and breathed slowly, grounding myself before I answered. Because, Alicia, I said softly, warning only helps someone who wants to listen. She flinched, but she didn't deny it. You weren't blind, I continued. You were choosing not to see, choosing to believe him, choosing the life he promised you, even when it came at a price your mother would never have allowed. Tears streamed again down her cheeks. Dad, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know he stole from the foundation. I thought, I know what you thought, I said, but thinking isn't the same as looking, and loving someone isn't the same as trusting them. She swallowed hard. What happens now? You'll cooperate with the DA. You'll repay the foundation. You'll rebuild your life without shortcuts. And us? She asked, voice breaking. What about us? That question cut deeper than anything Damien had done. I sat beside her then, not as the ledger, not as the man who dismantled corporations and buried criminals, but as her father. The father who had once carried her on his shoulders, who had watched her take her first steps, who had promised Marina he would raise their daughter with love. I don't know yet, I admitted. Trust is not a light switch. It's not something you flip on because you're sorry. I exhaled slowly. But I'm not closing the door. Not forever. Her relief was instant, painful, real. She nodded and stood, shaky but determined. For the first time in years, I saw the girl Marina used to kiss goodnight, the one who still had pieces worth saving. When Alicia walked out of the courthouse, she didn't look back. And that was fine. Some journeys must start alone. Renee joined me a moment later, watching my daughter disappear down the steps. You gave her more mercy than most men would. No, I said quietly. I gave her the truth. What she does with it will determine if mercy follows. We walked outside together. The Arizona sun was setting, painting the sky in soft gold and bruised pink. Heat radiated from the concrete, but the air around us felt strangely clean. What now? Renee asked. Now, I said, breathing deeply. I go home. I rebuild the Marina Mercer Foundation properly. I make sure every dollar reaches someone who needs it. And I live the rest of my life without being silent. Renee studied me with that steady, perceptive gaze of hers. You know, she said, most people spend their old age fading away. You stepped into it like a storm. I smiled faintly. My whole life, I said, I believed that patience was kindness, that silence kept peace. But silence, I looked at her, is too easily mistaken for weakness. And now I know better. The sun dipped behind the courthouse tower, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I turned toward them not afraid, not diminished, but steady. I learned something, I said quietly. Sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself and the people around you is to finally balance the books. Renee nodded. And you did? Yes, I answered. And I'll never let them go unbalanced again. The story ends there not with vengeance, but with clarity. Not with destruction, but with rebuilding. Not with silence, but with a man finally remembering who he was. Calvin Mercer, the ledger. A man who refused to disappear quietly again.